What's up, guys? Today I'm going to be walking you through my process on this forest giant project I recently finished. I'm going to cover each tool that I used, how I used them, and I'm also going to share some useful tips along the way. If you guys want access to the files and some of the assets I made for this project, I've made them available through my Patreon. You can find the link for that in the description. All right, so first thing I want to cover is the mood board and the references that I gathered. Before I do any project, regardless of what it is, I'm always going to spend maybe 30 minutes to an hour getting references, just so that I know what I'm going to be pulling from while I'm working on the project. So it's important to not spend a ton of time putting your references together. It's very easy to go overboard, but as long as you have enough, it should be fine. So for this project, I knew that I wanted to do something relating to like giant ancient tree trunks of some kind. One of my favorite movies, Princess Mononoke, does this beautifully. And they have these massive tree trunks in this forest. And I thought this was a really cool guide for me to use with creating the trees. While I was gathering these references, I was kind of thinking what tools I was going to be using for each asset that I knew that I was going to have to make. So for these tree trunks, I knew that I was going to be using 3D Coat just because it's one of my favorite softwares to use for sculpting stuff like this. And I'd never done something like this, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do that. And for the subject of the piece, I did want to have some kind of subject. I knew that it could be some kind of creature. Maybe it was lost or forgotten, or it was, it was killed somehow, some way. I thought a golem would be kind of cool, just because I've never done something like that. And so what I did was I gathered a few of these references. Some of these are AI, but it's not really important. Just kind of gets the idea across. And then what I did was I just kind of sketched out a little character. So this is kind of what I was thinking for the piece. I would have this this golem creature here. I'd make him in maybe 3D Coat as well, and then pose him, or maybe just sculpt him posed, and then have this tree trunk kind of just enveloping him, almost like he was, maybe he, like I said before, maybe he was killed in battle, or maybe, he was cursed through this forest. So I thought that'd be a really cool story or narrative to explore. And once I think I started creating this character, so these are some like blockouts, I kind of found out quickly that it wasn't really matching the vibe of the original sketch. The original sketch has more of like a stylized approach, and I think I wanted to go further into the realm of something that's more believable and realistic. So kind of like a humanoid that's just kind of made of rock rather than some sort of mountainous, golem creature. And this is just kind of stuff that you figure out along the way when you're working in 3D, especially. So I knew that I would make this character in 3D Coat or ZBrush. I'm not a character artist, like I've said before, but I always try to explore new workflows when I'm doing projects like this. And then I also wanted to have a character in there to provide scale for the piece. And I just used Daz for that. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty easy. But I'll cover everything I went through when creating these assets. And the last thing I wanted to point out was just the real-world photography that I gathered of these tree trunks that I found on Pinterest. So there's a lot of really good information in here. So you've got your vine growth. If you want to put vines in the trees, that'll also help cell scale. I knew that I wanted these tree trunks to be pretty huge. So we've got some like moss covered tree trunks. I could explore the workflow for that. And yeah, so this is kind of just the whole overview. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you guys into 3D Coat and show you the process of starting with the tree trunks. Okay, so now that we are in 3D Coat, I'm just going to cover what I did to create the tree trunks. If you guys want a more in-depth video on this software and everything that it can do, just comment below and I'll definitely look into putting that together for you guys. But there's also tons of videos on YouTube if you guys want to learn more about this software. So for now, I'm just going to cover these tree trunks and kind of what I did. So when I was making these tree trunks, I'm going to make a new layer here. And I found a tool down here called Curves. There it is. And what this tool will do is it will create points, and then you can adjust these points and kind of move them around and manipulate them to form some tube shapes. So this is pretty much what I use to make these tree trunks. So if I were to just scale these guys up like this, let's turn this floor off here. And yeah, so like this could be the start of a tree trunk right here. And then maybe if I hit enter, that'll apply the shape. And then I can delete the curve and then just maybe start a new one at a point here. Move this guy around. There we go. And then just scale it up like that. And then if I hit enter again, it'll just merge the shape. It's a little off there, but that's okay. So what I would do is then I would take a tool called the cutoff tool, which is up here, and just slice the bottom of the tree trunk. And then by using these brushes over here, these are a few alphas that I've made in the past. I think I made these for my previous pack that I made. But yeah, so if I just go to a tool like the build tool, and then I just select this alpha here, I can change the rotation of the brush, and then I can just kind of start sculpting the primary forms on the tree trunk. And then I can, maybe smooth this guy here, and then, kind of rinse and repeat until I'm happy with, the final product. I can take the pose tool here, reset axis, just scale this guy up here, just stretch it up a bit. And yeah, so that's kind of the workflow, the general workflow that I did for making these tree trunks. So I just made 3 to 4 of them, just so I had more leverage working in Blender when I was going to make my scene. I just wanted to have more variety in the tree trunks that I was going to be using, instead of just having one tree trunk duplicated all over the place. I also have some recordings of making these actual tree trunks. I can share those on my Patreon if you guys want access to those. But for this video, I just wanted to cover just the general workflow that I did to make these guys. Also, while I was working on these, I wanted to keep a little human figure in here, just to kind of help me with the scale when I was pushing the forms and the detail in the tree trunks, just because it's extremely useful to have that kind of reference there. Because without him, I don't really have an idea of how big these guys could be. But I did know that if these tree trunks were going to be as massive as they are in the project, a lot of the detail and selling the scale of these tree trunks would actually come later and not be in the actual sculpts themselves. Like, these guys are just, they're providing enough information for me to have as just, meshes in the scene. And then what I could do is I could push the texture of these tree trunks in Blender. So I can make a procedural texture and material for that. And then I could also paint the moss on the tree trunks in Blender, and add plants and vines and all that stuff. I could do all that later on. So I knew that with these meshes here, these sculpts, all I wanted to focus on was just getting the primary shapes down and having them look somewhat decent, so that when I brought them into Blender, they'd pretty much be ready to go. So once I was finished with these guys, I would just export them. So what I generally do is I export each piece individually. Because if I were to go to export, so we go to file export, there's export scene, which is just going to export the entire thing. But if I have a bunch of these, these different objects in here, I'm going to want to maintain, most of the resolution in them individually. So to do that, I just do export selected objects. So I would go here. We can just do this one, for example. So we'll overwrite that. And then what 3D Coat will do is it'll give you this pop-up window, and it's going to give you the option to reduce the poly count on the sculpts, because these sculpts here are somewhat high resolution, and I definitely don't need such a massive amount of polygons for these guys. And I can actually go into detail into that in Blender in a second. But once I was ready to export these, I just kind of decide on the poly count output, and then just hit OK, and it'll export it. So once I did that, I was good to go with my tree trunks, and then I'll bring you guys into Blender to show you what I did to push these guys even further. All right, so now that we're in Blender, we have the tree mesh in front of us here, and then we have some moss and plants and vines and all that stuff scattered on top. But I'm going to break this down into a few different steps on how I approached this, and making sure that this was as optimized as I could possibly get it for the project, because this was such a small portion of the project, and I wanted to make sure that I was optimizing as I was going along. So I didn't run into any types of performance issues moving forward or later down the line. So I'm going to take the original mesh from 3D Coat, and I'm going to put it in solo mode here. And so what I did was I wanted to push the detail a little bit more. And the way that I did that was I just went into the modifiers tab here, and I just went to displace, and I think I just used a noise texture. So if you just hit new, go over here and click this, click, I think it was either clouds or noise or something like that. So this looks good. And then I just, adjusted the scale, the strength of it, till I had some kind of, some nice extra detail on the mesh there. So once I had that, I knew that I was going to be scattering stuff on top of this, but I didn't want to rely on such a massive poly count mesh to do that, or object to do that on. So what I did was I just duplicated the tree trunk, and then I remeshed it. You can do this with the modifiers. There's a remesh right here, but I didn't do that. I think I used this this remesh add-on. I can link this below in the description for any of you guys that are curious. This is a really, really cool add-on because it kind of does what ZBrush does, because ZBrush is like one of the best ways to remesh something accurately, or at least somewhat, pretty decent. But what this will do is you can tell it a bunch of things. You can make sure that the output is maybe triangulated faces instead of square. Yeah, you hit remesh, and it'll do its thing. So I think right here is the resolution of the vertexes. So if I hit remesh, there we go, and we have a remeshed version. So this is extremely low poly, but I didn't go this low poly. But I did something kind of similar, where I just I had a much lower resolution version of the tree, and then what that was going to be used as was my designated object to be scattering everything on top of. So if I go out of solo mode here, we have this wireframe mesh version here, which is this is the remeshed version that I created. So if we so if we go into solo here, it's a much more manageable mesh to work from. And what I did was I just went into the viewport, the object properties here, go to viewport, and I put it on wire just so I could still see it while I was working. And then on top of that, I created a material that I called Ghost, which is basically just a basic material with the alpha turned all the way off. So it's not showing in the render view or the material view. It's just being used for the object properties to scatter the plant life on top of. So once I had that figured out, I knew that I was going to need to focus on creating a material for the tree trunk. So if we put the tree trunk in solo mode again, I'm going to cover the material that I made for this tree trunk. So when I was looking at references for the textures that I was going to need for this tree, I knew that I was going to need some tree bark and then moss as well. So what I did was I just gathered the materials that I needed. I'm pretty sure I either used Quixel or textures, maybe a combo of both. But let's just click in this bark horn group here, for example. So I have all the textures of this material plugged in. And before I even brought any of these materials into Blender, I'll click this guy, for example. And what I can do is bring him up in a separate window. See, those are all the textures in the project that I used. So if I take any of these, what I wanted to do was I wanted to keep the resolution of them. So I think most of these textures were 4K resolution, but I knew that I wasn't going to need the full detail because most of this tree was going to be covered in moss, number one. Number two, the camera wasn't going to be anywhere near the actual mesh. It was going to probably be like further in the distance. So I didn't really need all of that information in that 4K texture to be visible. So to optimize that, I used something called IrfanView. And what this software is really good at is you can take any image and drag it in. So we've got our image here. Oops, there it is. Okay, so what we do is we have this image here, and then what we can do is we can go to File, Save Original Folder, and then save it as a JPEG through this drop down. And then on the top right here, we have a quality slider that allows us to kind of just reduce the quality of the original image. But I'm still maintaining the size of the image, just not the detail in the image. So if we hit 40 is probably fine. It's a good amount. Hit save. What that's going to do is it's going to reduce the quality of the image, just not the size. So if we zoom in, you see these little tiny squares, these like little cube squares all over the image. It's much less quality in the image, but we still have the scale of this. And what this is going to do is this is actually going to drastically reduce the size of the file. So if we go to properties, it's only 963 kilobytes versus, a 4K texture, which might be, I don't know, it could be 8 megabytes, 9 megabytes, 10 megabytes, especially normal maps, which are generally very, very high file sizes. And if you were to take all of these textures that I have in this folder, and those were the original images, the file size and the size of the VRAM for the project would skyrocket. So that would just be a real pain to fix down the line. So I wanted to make sure all these textures were optimized before bringing them into Blender. So all these textures here for this one material were optimized using IrfanView, which I'm pretty sure is free. I could be wrong, but I'm almost certain it's a free software you can get. And I know you can also use like Photoshop to do the exact same thing, but IrfanView is so much faster. So that's kind of just one tool that I use in my workflow for optimizing textures. And I did the exact same thing for all of the other textures that I included. So we've got this other bark texture here, and then I just kind of created a mix shader, mixing those two together. And then I also created a noise mixture that was going to drive the factor of how those guys mix together. So if I were to go into the material preview here, we can see we've got our mixture of bark, and then we have the moss texture here as well. So again, I think this moss texture I got from, let's see, here it is. Click in here. Again, yeah, so this is from textures.com as well. And what I did was I actually wanted to figure out a way to have the moss only appear on the tree based on the normals of the mesh. So if we look a little bit closer here at the mesh, we can see that the moss is actually only appearing on the Z normals of the mesh. Going back to our references, it's kind of doing the exact same thing on this tree here, where you see most of the mesh is occurring on the top facing, I guess you would say these are like the faces of, if this were a mesh, you've got these polys here, right? And all the polys that are kind of facing up on the outside are kind of where the moss is growing. So I wanted to replicate that in this material because I think it just added a more realistic look than the entire trunk being covered in moss, which is kind of what you would see in the original references from Princess Mononoke. I didn't want the entire tree to be covered in moss. I mean, you can see some tree bark here, but yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of what I did for that. So to do that, let's go into I think we've got where is it? Okay, so here we have the noise group that I created, which is essentially just driving the factor of the mixture of the bark shaders and the moss texture. So if we go into this bark and moss mix, all we really have is we've got a texture map node here, and then that's actually being driven by the separate XYZ node. And then I plugged that into a color ramp and then added a gamma. So if I were to pull this down just a bit, what this is going to do is it's going to dictate how much of it is showing on that Z normal of the mesh. And then if I take the color ramp, there we go. So if I move the black, it's going to kind of just show less of it based on that noise texture that it's also mixing with through the bark textures. So this added a really, really cool effect and allowed me to kind of get more control on the moss growth of the material. But once I figured that out, also I can probably link this this in my Patreon if you guys want access to it. I probably can't supply the textures, but I can definitely supply the node setup if you guys are curious and want access to that. So what I did after that was I think I also added some kind of like grunge texture, I think, to drive the bark. Let's see. So if I mess with this color ramp here, this is essentially just going to drive the factor of the barks mixing with each other. So it's just an added layer of detail. So essentially, when in doubt and you want to create something realistic, just add layer and layer and layer layers of textures to mimic those details that you would see in real life, whether it's like a building, a tree, or whatever. So once this was figured out, I also knew that this wasn't going to be enough for me to use for the tree. I was going to want to scatter real moss on the tree as well to just add that extra bit of detail and depth that was actually pushing off of the tree. So if I go into the render view here, like this looks, you know, it looks decent, especially from afar. It looks pretty good. But once I found a moss texture, again, I think I got it from, here, these are the moss clumps that I have here. So if I go here and click, there we go. So we have our moss clumps here. And these are extremely low poly cards, essentially, with just moss on them. And these are some custom clumps that I created because I knew that I wanted to have some good coverage. If you look at like real moss, generally, a lot of the time, it's extremely fine detailed clumps of it. But this moss, you can see it's a bit, these are a bit larger. So there's different types of species of moss. Like this is definitely one example. I really love this look of the kind of moss that we have here. And what I did was I just basically found a texture of moss that I really liked. And I just created some clumps of it that I was satisfied with. And I just wanted to make sure, absolutely sure, that these cards here were as low poly as I could get them. So all we're doing really is we're just driving the texture through these cards, and then they're just alphas. But at the distance that we were going to be seeing this stuff, it wasn't really going to matter. So once I had these clumps, what I can do is I can take the mesh here. Let's go into the add-on that I use. So I use Geoscatter. I think this is a very, very popular add-on that people use for scattering generally anything in Blender. This tool is amazing at scattering plant life. So what I did was, I think if I hide that, that was the moss scatter, and then we have the ferns there. So I'll disable those. I will delete this, and then we will select. We'll make sure our mesh is selected. So we click the Tree 2 remesh, which is what this stuff is scattered on, and then we just select our moss clumps, and then we go to manual scatter here, and this is just making sure that the mesh, like whatever we're scattering on, is the mesh. of this this tree trunk. So just make sure that that's selected, and then you just go into scatter objects. And what we can do now is we can start painting this. So I'm going to go into material preview just so it's not as slow. Yeah, and then we can just we can start kind of painting the moss, and we can control the coverage based on like the size of the brush. If we hit Shift F, that's kind of like how close the meshes are, the moss meshes or clumps are to each other, and we can also control how many of them there are within this this brush here. So then once I kind of had that, I could just start scattering instances of the moss onto the tree. And this was, again, this whole tree trunk guy here was pretty much a trial run. It was pretty much a trial run for me to figure out all this stuff. So I didn't really start with the layout stuff just yet. I wanted to make sure I could nail this this workflow down before kind of moving forward, because there's a lot of trial and error in figuring out the best way to optimize everything. So let's just say that we're happy with that. And we're kind of just painting on the areas that are already covered in the moss material. We hit exit, and then what we can do is we can go into the parameters here down below, and we can change a lot of these parameters here. So we can go to like rotation, for example. We can align the normal, so like if we wanted all of it facing up, for example, but we don't want that. Random rotation just kind of randomizes everything. And then I also would go into scale and then go to grow, and it just drastically increases the size of all the moss, which is really, really useful because that way I can kind of distinguish how big I really want it without having to adjust the size of the original moss clumps that I created. So let's just say that we're happy with, you know, something like this maybe. Maybe that's fine. Maybe this is, you know, some sort of moss species that's just generally larger, kind of like the references we were looking at. And then if we go into rendered view, we get a really, really cool result of moss growth on the tree. And again, I wasn't going to cover the entire tree. I think most of the tree trunks were going to be visible like from this angle, at least the primary tree trunk that I worked with. So I just kind of covered the areas with scattering the moss where I really needed it. I didn't want to go, like if I'm only looking at this direction, you know, there's no need in scattering it behind, right? So that's kind of how I did that. And then once I figured out the moss, I kind of did the exact same thing with the ferns. I think I acquired the ferns either through Quixel, or I think I maybe used the ferns that were already supplied in this geoscatter, I think in the biomes library. So if I go over here and drag this over, create a new window, go to file browser, or no, whoops, asset browser, there we go. And go to Botanic, and then we just go to, I think we just type in fern. Yeah, I think I just used these ferns. So yeah, that's kind of how I did the plants. And then next, I'm going to cover the vines. The way these vines were set up was using geometry nodes. Now there's, I think there's a lot of different tutorials on geometry nodes. I'm not an expert on them whatsoever. But I think I followed a specific tutorial on YouTube on how to create some good-looking, decent vine growth in Blender. I will link that video in the description below if you guys are interested in that. So if I go into the geometry node editor here for this, and we click, let's see, there we go. So here's the vine setup. So again, I don't want to go into, you know, crazy detail with this, but the way it works is you have two different vines that you are creating. You've got a large vine, and then you have a oopsies, and then you have a smaller vine, which is this smaller vine going over here. And then these are all plugged into this parameter over here that allows me to control, this group input here that gives me parameters in the geometry modifiers tab, and then I can control all that stuff, which is extremely useful. And so if I go over to large vine thickness, oopsies, let's turn this on. This is the meshed version. So yeah, if we click this guy and we go to large vine thickness, you can see we're controlling the thickness of that, or we can control the thickness of the smaller vine. And what's really really cool, the best part of this is that you can draw it, and it'll stick to the surface. So if we go to cursor, it'll just kind of draw it in, floating in space. But if we click surface over here, we can draw it on the tree, which is really really cool. And then it's also still editable. It's a hard word to say. Editable. Editable. We can select these points here, and we can just adjust them, which is really cool. And then what I did after that was, like, once I had a good group of these vines created, I would basically duplicate that and then turn it into an actual mesh, because this is not a mesh. This is still a bunch of points just being solidified into a cylinder. So once I did that, we have our mesh. And if I go to edit mode, you can see all the geometry there. But now I can scatter. I can use the geoscatter add-on on top of these vines just to add more detail on those vines, which is really cool. And again, I was just using the tree texture that I created. I think I altered it just a little bit on these vines just to kind of keep it consistent through everything. All right, so now I wanted to get into the actual project file of the final composition and talk a little bit more about my thinking and what I was doing for setting up this scene. So what I did was I knew that if I go back to my references here, in my sketch, I have the golem dude kind of being swallowed by this tree. And I thought it'd be a really, really cool opportunity to maybe put a character somewhere on one of these portions of the tree trunk, kind of walking up the tree. So if this were kind of like a game environment, for example, and this were like a playable space, we would go over to the main area here and think of it like, maybe there's something above this tree, like at the very tippy top of this tree that you want to get to. And here, I'm actually going to disable a bunch of this plant scatter because it's really slowing things down here. So yeah, so what I did was I wanted to kind of have a dude on maybe like one of the vines that was growing on the tree. So I mean, you can kind of see in this sketch, it's a similar composition where you've got the primary subject here, and you've got this kind of growth happening here that could be going toward the foreground of the where the camera is. So this would also help me sell the scale of how giant this this forest giant guy is. So yeah, so I kind of just did the exact same thing with everything I talked about with scattering the moss and all that stuff and all the plant life. So I created a vine, I drew it, and I wanted this vine to be one of the larger vines. So if we kind of look at it as a whole, we've got these big shapes here, these big vine shapes, and then we've got some smaller vines or some medium-sized vines, and then some smaller vines, which just helps sell everything and the scale of everything a lot more. Just because in nature, you're always going to have big, medium, small shapes, and that really kind of helps sell the detail and believability of everything that you're looking at. So the next thing I'm going to probably cover is how I made this golem dude, and it's actually it's pretty straightforward. I didn't really go too crazy in how I made, the process of making this dude. It wasn't too overboard. So basically, what I did was I used Daz 3D to get my basic form of a human. So I'll go into Daz 3D and I'll show you guys how that looks. All right, so we are in Daz now, and this is the model that I used for creating the golem. So I basically just took like one of my figure dudes that I had purchased in the past. You could definitely use, I mean, Daz is a free software, so and it does come with free starter packs to use. So like if I go into Genesis 8, it's up to Genesis 9 now, I think. But if you go to figures, you've already got some models to pick from where you could do the exact same thing, and it's all free. But this is a model that I purchased in the past, and what I did was I just kind of changed his proportions a bit, so he was a more like a thick dude, So if we go into the parameters here and we type in body build, yeah, so we can just, make him huge, just because the golem, I wanted him to have some meat on him, so to speak. I didn't want him to be like thin or skinny. So once I had the pose pretty much how I wanted it, I exported that and brought it into ZBrush, and I just basically started sculpting rock textures and all that stuff. So I'll bring you guys to ZBrush real quick and just kind of show you what that looks like. Okay, so we are in ZBrush now, and we've got our golem dude here. And when I was sculpting this guy, I really didn't want to go crazy with like the face and all that stuff. In the final result, it did end up looking a little wonky, so I probably should have spent a little bit more time on the face. But I didn't want too much expression on this golem. That's why I kind of just left it to be more just like the eye crevices and just no mouth. That way you could kind of, I don't know, just kind of, he was a little bit more, how do I say, just kind of like lifeless, just because he is just kind of sitting there. I didn't want too much of an expression on his face, so it just created a bit more mystery, the fact that he didn't have a mouth or much of a, a face. But it just added enough, to believe that it was some kind of being. And then I just used some rock alpha textures that I've purchased in the past, and I just started kind of sculpting them on the dude. So if I go to the standard brush here and I change it to the stroke to drag rectangle, and then I just import the mesh, or the alpha rather, of the texture, so we can use this one for example. So we'll just change the brush size to something like this. And if I start dragging, you can see it's creating some sort of rock detail there. And then obviously if I bring the Z intensity up, it'll just kind of push how much it's extruding. So yeah, I just did that for the whole guy, and then I also added some kind of like gauntlet, some like rock gauntlets with some runes on them. Maybe this guy was, maybe there's like a magic spell that was keeping him inside this tree, and I wanted to kind of just, I don't know, add some more mystical detail to him rather than him just being made of rock. So once I was happy with this guy, I exported him out of ZBrush, brought him into Blender, and then just kind of optimized him with decimating him. I created a texture for him, very similar to the tree texture that I created. So we have that moss texture somewhere right there. And then I just replaced the bark textures with rock instead. So if I go to the material preview, very similar. And then again, you have the moss growth only on the normals that are facing up. So the Z normals. And then everything else is kind of rinse and repeat. I did the same thing with plant growth, moss, vines, and having, just kind of drawing them around him, all that stuff. And then going back to how I have these vines set up, I thought it would be kind of cool to just have this vine growing toward the golem to kind of just lead your eye to him. And then that would kind of carry through past around his neck, and then go around the side of the tree there. So that could be like some sort of path that this character was on. So yeah, you can kind of get lost in the story when you start putting all this stuff together, which is really, really fun. And also some of the trees in the back, I wanted to kind of do the same thing with the vines, just to kind of have more detail back there, because I think in the original paint over that I didn't do that. And it was definitely visible. So I wanted to push that a bit more for the animation sequence of this scene. All right, so we have pretty much two more things I want to cover for this project, which is the character, which was, again, it was kind of simple, but it's a combination of Daz, where I had a character that I set up and I posed him. But in order to do that, what I did was I knew that I wanted this character resting on this vine, but I needed some kind of reference to pull from or use in Daz so that I could pose him on, like I knew what I was going to pose him on, so I didn't have to do a bunch of back and forth. Generally, I could import the Daz model T-posed into, rigged, and put him in Blender. But for this project, I just kind of wanted to be a little bit faster. So what I did was I just modeled out a cylinder similar to the vine that he's standing on, or to where I want him on the vine, and then just kind of made that shape. So now I have my reference of the vine that he's going to be standing on. And if I go to Daz and I open up the project, now we have our reference object here, which is the vine, and then our character kind of posed on top of it. If I pull up my references here, I took a few screenshots of what I was thinking. So either he's kind of standing there and just looking at the vine, or looking at the golem, which was, that was kind of my first idea. But then I was thinking, what if he was just kind of on his way up the vine, which makes a little bit more sense, because, or at least that's just kind of what I wanted to go for, like he was actually traveling through. And I think in the animation, I wanted to, I think it would have been cool if he was animated, like he was actually in the middle of climbing the vine. But again, that was just so much more work that I was gonna have to throw in there. So I'll probably pursue something more like that in a future project. So for this guy, I kind of just kept him static, and then I just simmed a cloth for his cape in Blender, and I can actually show you guys how I did that, which is really cool. So if we have our character in solo mode here, what I did was I created a mesh of the character, all mixed together. So if I hide the sword here, I created a mesh of the character and then just duplicated it into one mesh so that I could use it as a collision for the simulation of the cloth. But what I did was I actually just I decimated the character quite a bit, because you don't need all this resolution when you're simming cloth. So what I can do here is I can just decimate this guy. Set that to 0.1 maybe, and then we just hit apply, and now we have a low resolution version of our character here. So what I did for the cloth was I used an add-on called Simply Cloth Pro, or Simply Cloth Studio. You can definitely do Cloth Sim in Blender without this add-on, but this add-on's it's amazing. So what I do is I start with plane, and automatically it doesn't have any subdivisions. So we'll right click and hit subdivide, hit Shift R a few times just to add some more subdivisions. And then before I do anything, I hit U in edit mode, and I do project from view. So if we go to the UVs of the plane, we have this lined up so that I can save this for UVing some textures for it, which I'll get to in a second. But then what I did was so before I even did this, I wanted to make sure that I had the plane set up. So we just move these points here. So I think I projected it from this this subdivision. So there's no subdivisions on it, just the 4 verts here. Then what I did was I moved the verts in place where I wanted them. I don't know, something like this maybe. And then I brought it up. Where is okay, so let's put him there, and we'll hide this. There we go. And then, yeah, so I brought this guy up here. Then I subdivided it. Good amount. And then just moved the verts with this guy turned on. So we hit O, and then zoom in here with the mouse wheel. And then I just move these verts here, kind of like where I want them, which is, it's probably fine. And then I think I included the vine cylinder underneath this guy. So we could do this, put it in solo mode. There we go. So I add collision to the cylinder underneath. Let's move this guy up a bit. There we go. To the knight himself, and then we do convert to simply cloth for the plane, and then we hit stop. There we go. And if I were to hit spacebar, you can see it sims, but it's just going to fall off the character, which is not what we want. So what I did was I would go into this drop down and go to adjust and pin, And then if I go to pin group live paint, it should start animating. We don't want that. But we just start painting on the cape where we want it to be pinned in space. So if I were to hit simulate, these guys will not move, or they won't, fall. So if we get out of this, go back to object mode, hit stop and reset. Now if we sim it, it should just kind of fall without these guys moving down. So I did something very similar to this. This kind of looks crappy right now, but let's just say that we're happy with this. And we can always go into the timeline and adjust, where we want this sim to be and how like where in the timeline it's set up. But let's say we're happy with this guy. We just go to finish and then hit apply. Before I do that though, I'm gonna go back to simulate, and you can definitely do like self collision with the plane. You can do a whole bunch of different things. This add-on's crazy, but for what I'm using it for, there's really not a whole lot that I need. So I'll hit stop and I'll redo the sim, and I'll maybe actually let's stop one more. We'll do viewport resolution up. Stop. We'll let's do thickness, and we'll do like maybe, I don't know, point. Actually, we'll drop the resolution there. Yeah, so we have a little bit of thickness here now, but I don't really want that much. So maybe like 0.05, 0.035. Sure. Hit play. Let it sim. There we go. And once I was happy with it, I hit, we go to finish here, and we do apply and sculpt. Hit OK. Oops. Finish and apply cloth, not apply and sculpt. There we go. So now it's a mesh. But what's really cool now is if I go to the shader editor and I do, I think cape, yeah. So I'm gonna put this in material view. Okay, so here's our cape. But what I want to do is I actually want to scale this up so that it's the size of the full UV here, the UV square. And then if I go into my material, I don't think I went crazy, but what you can do is you can use some textures to drive the alpha of the cape. So I didn't do this for the piece, but this is something I do sometimes when I'm doing cloth sims for concepts or pieces in general. So I think you can get this from ArtStation. It's called MK Torn Fabric. It's not too expensive. It's maybe a few dollars, but it comes with a ton of different alphas that you can use to drive cloth, which is really, really cool. So let's change this to a larger size. Let's say we want to use this guy here. And since this is an alpha, I'm probably going to keep the same resolution. I don't want to drive it down too far. But what it'll do is it's going to create some really cool texturing on the cape. So maybe it's more of like a worn cape, and then we can just add like a cloth texture and all that stuff. But I didn't go that far, honestly. I kind of just left it how it is. So the last thing I wanted to cover for you guys is how I animated the fog in the scene. So if we go here and we go into solo mode and we go to render, this is our cube of fog and clouds. But if I hit spacebar, you'll see that it animates pretty slowly though, and that's done on purpose. So what I did was I essentially have a noise texture driving the density of this fog, and I plugged that into the density portion of this principled volume for the cube, and then between that I actually have I've got a mapping texture group here of the mapping and texture coordinate nodes, and then here's the noise texture that's kind of driving the actual noise. But what I did was I just animated. I switched it to, from 3D to 4D, and then I just animated the W. So you have animation in the actual noise, and then also just animated the which direction it was flowing throughout the animation. I actually wanted to show you guys a updated version of that that fog material that I made. This is a much more accurate representation of what I was trying to achieve for it. So you have this cube that's containing this fog here, but what I wanted to achieve was if you were to do this without what I have set up, you would have a cube full of a noise texture, but there's no fall off. So like if I want to have a plane, let me just scale this guy up here, and let's say we don't want, we don't want the clouds to appear as thick above. We would want some sort of fall off, which is driving where these clouds are showing up. So what I did was and I can supply this to you guys through my Patreon. That'll be available over there. But we have our volume by itself, which is just this. And then if we go to the beginning here, we have a few things. So one, we have the noise texture, which is just what you're seeing in here. And then two, that is being plugged into this multiply texture here, which is essentially going to control the density of this fog here, how thick this volume is, and also this gradient texture. So if I go here and only show this color ramp, this is going to drive where it's showing up. So the black means that it's just not going to be there. So if I were to pull this down and then cut that, you can see it's now cut off there. So you get some more control with this, which is really, really cool. Last but not least, I probably should have showed you guys this sooner, but this is kind of just the final comp and look of the render before I actually rendered out the animation. But if you guys want more in-depth details on how I went about rendering this animation, the whole workflow behind all that stuff, let me know in the comments, and I can definitely put something together for you guys down the road. But yeah, that's pretty much what I went through for creating this project. Hopefully you guys found a lot of this useful. If you guys have any questions, definitely voice below in the comments. If you want to explore some of the files and assets that I created for this project, those will be supplied in my Patreon, which is linked below. And that's it. Yeah, so thanks for watching. If this was helpful, hit like and subscribe. More breakdowns and process videos are coming soon. Take care.